Welcome to the Art Elevator. I'm your host, Larissa Wild. Join me on this podcast as I dig deep interviewing art historians, curators, appraisers, artists, and more to bring you lifetimes of knowledge in a digestible format to elevate your knowledge of art. Thank you so much for being with me here today on the Art Elevator podcast, Doug. I really appreciate you coming and sharing your expertise.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me on your podcast. I love listening to your podcast episodes, and I'm honored to be included as a guest.
Well, we have a really interesting 3-part series. Doug had so much to share with us that I decided we're going to make this into 3 parts. So in this episode, we're going to talk about money laundering and the art world. So to dive right in, Doug, can you explain what money laundering is? Like, what are the mechanics of it?
So, every dollar in the drug industry and other criminal enterprises is illegal, and it has to be laundered. Laundering means to convert illegal proceeds into money or assets that appear legitimate and can therefore be used in legitimate commerce.
Okay, that's nice and clear. I love that. So how exactly does this tie into the art world?
So, the opaque nature of the art market and the anonymity in sales allow criminal organizations to utilize it in laundering illicit money. Art value is also subjective and nebulous in nature. So, those factors and the lack of regulation that have existed in the art industry for decades are very appealing to criminal organizations because they make money laundering easier.
That's really interesting. And it is so true. The values can seem so nebulous coming from the perspective as an appraiser. I understand that there is methodology that you can get to certain values depending on your intended use. However, there is so much room for manipulation when people are coming from a spurious angle. It's disappointing that art is the victim of this type of thing. So, can you share an example of how does this take place in the art world? Like, can you walk us through the step by step how this might happen?
Sure. So let's say I'm a South American drug organization and I'm selling $2.5 million worth of cocaine to a US based drug organization. If they give me $2.5 million in cash, I have to launder every dollar. That can be time consuming and also a complicated task. Now, let's say I have an original painting by Claude Monet. Paintings by Monet can be worth millions of dollars. My Monet happens to be worth $500,000, which some of his paintings are. So instead, I give them the $2.5 million worth of cocaine and my Monet painting. In return, they give me $3 million. This is all done through shell companies that appear to be legitimate businesses. So on paper, that transaction details one business selling an original Monet to another business for $3 million. Monet's works are known to be very valuable. So to the outside observers and authorities, it wouldn't raise any red flags. So the $3 million is now legitimate and laundered.
My goodness. And so, in this chain of laundering, you're saying there are these different entities that are involved. Are all of these parties complicit or are some drawn in unknowingly? Like, is there a dealer that has a Monet that doesn't even know they're going to be a part of it?
So in the example I gave, the parties are exchanging money for illicit products or services. So both of those parties are complicit and knowledgeable of the true source and use of the funds. However, if they were to include a third party in the transaction somehow, it could be feasible that the third party would not be aware of the illicit nature of the transactions. But involving a third party may complicate the situation if that third party was aware of the true value of the Monet, for instance. Simple art purchases can be done between private parties without involving a gallery or auction house that may complicate the transaction. So involving outside third parties wouldn't be done unless necessary. We can actually take this example a step further and discuss even a second type of the money laundering. So criminal organizations often use multiple shell companies. They're all owned and operated by the two illegal organizations involved in the criminal transactions. These companies could own multiple works of art or high value antiquities and objects. These organizations could then transfer these items between them on paper in place of the illicit services or products that are actually being exchanged. So again, it appears to be a legitimate transaction of money for artworks, and the money therefore appears legitimate. They could do this indefinitely with multiple works being exchanged on paper, and the works don't ever even have to physically change hands. So many art transactions involve works in storage or free trade zones that never physically move after the transaction. So this would be another way that art could be used to launder money between these organizations.
So it really seems like there's the art world and then there's this other art world that's functioning and it's sort of just hiding under the surface, but it's really quite big. Now, Doug, where are these paintings coming from? I mean, we've got these shell companies that are acting as, somewhat reputable dealers in some sense. But where are these paintings coming from? Where are they sourced from? Can you walk us through the chain of command there?
Yeah, so these artworks or high value items can be purchased from many sources, sometimes the same sources that legitimate purchasers use. So the initial purchase may be legitimate, and the sellers, be they an auction house, a gallery, or whatever, are not aware of who the actual purchaser is or how the item will be used in the future to facilitate money laundering. The anti money laundering statutes that many countries are implementing are designed to make sellers of artworks conduct more due diligence into who is selling and buying the artworks, as well as the source of the money. For decades, they didn't have to do it and they didn't bother, which in turn led to the industry being utilized to circumvent the law.
Yes, there's been a recent edition of Know Your Seller that I know that the dealers and the auction houses have had to implement a lot of extra steps that didn't used to be there in knowing who the person, what the source is.
Exactly. We saw this example in Mexico when they implemented their anti money laundering statutes and started regulating the industry more, that the Mexican art market actually dropped 70% in sales. So that right there tells you that before those laws were implemented, it was definitely being utilized by people who were trying to circumvent who the actual purchaser was, what was the source of the funds, all those kind of things. And once the laws were implemented, it had a huge impact on the sales in that country.
My goodness, 70%. That's the majority of a market.
Yes.
Scary stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about your history and how you came to the point where you know so much about money laundering and the art world?
Yes, thank you. I was a federal agent with the U.S. Customs and Homeland Security Investigations for 21 years. During my time with U.S. Customs and Homeland Security Investigations, I investigated many different types of crimes, from narcotics investigations to money laundering, general smuggling cases, and many others. So I had a good base for investigations in general. The last 12 years of my career, I spent focusing my efforts on investigating crimes involving stolen art and antiquities, fake or fraudulent art and antiquities. That portion of my career was so rewarding in many ways. Art crimes differ from other types of crimes that we investigate in many subtle ways. Learning the intricacies of investigating these cases and how they differ from the other cases really was a great challenge. It was so rewarding and I was so passionate about it that I decided to start my own business, Odyssey Global Consulting, afterwards, and to continue this work that I love doing so much.
It's so fascinating. It's two very disparate areas of like investigation and crime and then art. And there's a delicacy to both, but very different. It's like a duality almost that you bridge this gap between the two different professions. It's like a space between.
Yes, there's definitely an inherent gap between the academics and the experts in the art world and law enforcement. One of the things that I prided myself on doing was bridging that gap to show the experts and the academics that there were people in law enforcement who loved art, understood it, and cared about the art in the same passion that they have, and that we were both on the same team, so to speak, in trying to make sure that the art market and the individuals involved in sales or purchases were abiding by the laws.
And, that is one thing that I love about this podcast and interviewing people across the spectrum in the art world. There's this cross pollination of knowledge and information, which by other people knowing what you do or what the art crime team is doing, or an art appraiser knowing what a provenance expert is doing, we can all be that much stronger as a profession. And yes, the opacity is, I think, always going to be there, but the more we can bring to the forefront the true story of what's really going on behind the scenes, not just the big headlines that you see of, $450 million sales. I think that the general public and other people in the art industry can really benefit from all hearing these stories and working together.
Yes, definitely. It really is an issue that we all need to address. Anybody who has a stake or a part in the art market, we really need to work together to ensure that the art market is being enjoyed by everybody, but also to make sure that it's not being exploited by criminal enterprises or unscrupulous individuals involved in the art market itself.
Yes, indeed. This is so interesting, Doug. It's something that most of us don't have an inside view on how this all happens. And a lot of us, I'm sure, aren't even aware that it's going on. So thank you so much for this insight and for explaining so clearly this process of how the art can be used for money laundering.
Oh, you're very welcome. And thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us on the Art Elevator today. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. If you found this podcast to be super helpful, please leave a review to spread the word. In the show notes below, you will find links mentioned in the interview and more. Here's to elevating your life with art.